want to welcome you all here today to you're going to be excited about what you're going to hear today. It's going to be a fantastic program. We had a preliminary program last night at Platform Houston. The speakers were very inspiring, and you're getting the chance to hear them here at the University of Houston. I want to say a couple of thank yous of people who helped make this event possible. First of all, Kala Marathi, Mike Young, and Professor Kumawala. All were very instrumental in organizing this so we could have it here at the University of Houston. We're going to have another program tonight, actually at the Channel 8 TV studio, where we're going to record the speakers here. It's going to be edited and then broadcast on primetime TV sometime in the October-November time frame. So what you're seeing here is what you'll have a chance to, you'll get more information here this afternoon than you will see on the actual TV program, because they're going to have to edit and shorten it down. My name is Dave Hansen. I'm the chairman of the MIT Enterprise Forum. The Enterprise Forum and Texas Young Professionals organized this event, but I should really be giving most of the credit to Niall Henderson, who's our program chair. He's the one that spearheaded this program. He had the inspiration, and he went out. He's also become a member of Ashoka, and has made a lot of very good connections. So we've been able to get some top-notch speakers here today. Now, I'd like to spend just a little bit of time telling you about the MIT Enterprise Forum, because most of you probably are not aware of who we are and what we do. The MIT Enterprise Forum is an organization that has 27 chapters worldwide. We're associated with MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the university there. And these chapters were first formed by MIT alums, but it has evolved so you do not need to be an MIT alum to be part of the organization. I'm a good example. I never went to MIT. I went to Berkeley. I'm a Berkeley radical, and I'm the chairman of the MIT Enterprise Forum. So any of you want to get involved, including students, please think about the MIT Enterprise Forum. Now, what do? Our charter is to really promote technological entrepreneurship, but we put on programs not only on entrepreneurship, but on economics and technology. So we've had programs like shale gas fracking, we've had cybersecurity, we've had future freshwater, we've had a lot of really exciting programs. In addition to the flagship programs, we do new venture clinics, where we have startup companies come in, present, and talk about their business to a board or a panel of advisors, and they get very good feedback on their presentations as well as their strategies. And the last thing we do is we have networking socials. Let me tell you about some of the programs we have coming up here in the next number of months. In October, we have a networking social. In November, we have a professor from MIT coming in talking about innovations that we need in the energy sector to really make energy more viable for the future. Because there is going to be a point, unless we do some new things, that we're going to eventually be running out of energy. In January, we have a business forecast luncheon at the Federal Reserve. We sold it out last year. We have a vice president from the Federal Reserve coming speaking, as well as a top economist from Compass Bank talking about what the 2014 is going to look like. In February, we have a program on cloud computing, and then in April, we're going to have a program on regenerative medicine. So I think you can see there's a lineup of some very interesting programs. If you want to check our website, miteftexas.org, to see what's going on. Last thing I want to do is say thank you to all our sponsors. We couldn't do the things we do without having a good set of sponsors. NRG has been the company has made this program here today and at Channel 8 possible. And so I want to really thank them for making this event possible. Okay, that's all I had to say about the MIT Enterprise Forum. I think what we'd like to do now is have a number of people come up and just say a couple of words of welcome. So I'd like to start off with Dean Latha Ramshan. If you would please come up.
Thank you, Dave. Welcome to all of you. It's great to have you all here. I want to thank the MIT Enterprise Forum, NRG, our sponsors, our great panel. It's nice to see an event like this being hosted at the Bauer College, where, as many of you know, our mission is driven by the fact that we need to create opportunity, not just for ourselves, but for others around us. Everything we do here is about making a difference, changing a life. And we just happen to be in academia, but really we are in the business of changing lives. So I really like the fact that you have this being hosted here at the Bauer College. Our programs in entrepreneurship speak to the fact that that's what we're all about. I just wanted to share two things with you all. I was at an event yesterday listening to Jim Clifton. He's written a book. He's the president of the Gallup poll. And they have, as you can imagine, he's written a book called The Coming Jobs War. So this is more about entrepreneurship, but I'll tell you why I think it's important. And this is based on 17 years of data that they've collected, the Gallup organization, not just in the US, but worldwide. So a ton of research went into this. And what he pointed out, two takeaways from that. One is, we spend a lot of money in this country, really everywhere, on innovation. We need innovation. We need those smart ideas, those big goals. We need those creative juices to flow. But innovation by itself does not create jobs, does not lead to opportunity, right? It's like the horse and the cart. You can keep filling up the cart, but you can pour money into the cart, you can come up with great ideas, but until you have entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship in the form of those horses willing to drive that cart into the marketplace, until you can take a cause and convert it into a sale, really that impacts people, you've really not done very much with your great ideas. So and I think that's important, and I say that because we are in an era where we're talking about STEM, we need more people to go into the STEM disciplines, absolutely. But we also need those entrepreneurial minds, and I see every one of you, my students here, so I'm expecting big things of you. The second thing he pointed out was, when it comes to IQ, when it comes to detecting that genius in youngsters. You go to a high school, you give them an SAT, you give them an ACT, you look at grades, you do an IQ test. You can determine that. And we do a good job spotting that talent and saying, hey, if you have this SAT, if you have this GPA, come here, we'll give you a scholarship. We spend a lot of time, resources on that. The same thing is true for sports. We identify sports talent early on, and we recruit them, right? But do we have such a test that can measure entrepreneurial skills? Right? And if you think about it, in this country, in the US today, there's about 6 million enterprises, organizations, businesses if you will, of which 2/3, almost 4 million, have employees, their size, less than 5 employees, right? That's the power, that's what made this country great, that's what's going to take us to the next step. However, if you look at what's been happening in the last 5 years, the number of startups is lower than the number of startups that do not succeed. So we are dying faster than the rate at which we are growing. And that's a cause for concern. And we take that very seriously in this college. Our programs here, Ken Jones is here, he directs our program. We are doing, Kala does that, we are creating courses that will foster this sense of entrepreneurship. And we are devoting a lot of time and resources into that. And the idea is not just business school students. You go to Melcher Hall, which is the next building right next door, and I don't know, as our students have been through that. You've all been through Red Labs. You just go into this room. It's really, I call it a room where creative juices flow. It's not about just being a Bauer business student. If you're a good student from technology, from the law school, from engineering, just come hang out with us. We need you all to discuss. We need you to converse. We need those conversations to get started. That's how those brilliant minds think, and then we can help them monetize that. So we're doing a lot with that. The beauty of what you're going to be talking about is that it's entrepreneurship with a soul, right? We have, 7 billion people today on this planet, right? And if you look at where production is happening versus where the population is, the total GDP in the world, anyone? $60 trillion. Okay? Of that, how much does the US produce? We produce about a quarter of that. Okay? But where is the population in the world? If you look at the developed versus the developing countries, 84% of the population is in the emerging markets, right? And we call that all kinds of names, income disparity. I was listening to a TED Talks the other day. Apparently the number of billionaires in this country, the people on the Forbes 400 list, if you look at the top 40 of them, their total wealth used to be in the billions. Now it's totally on a different scale. It's gone up tremendously. The 1% of the world's population that controlled wealth, that same amount of wealth today is being controlled by 0.1% of the population. So that disparity has gone up. And you can see that. We're producing 25% of the world's output, but even if we include some of the other developing nations, the consumers are not here. We only account for about 16% of the world's population, right? And we call that, and then that results in all kinds of things, right? Problems, conflicts, tensions, terrorists, wars. But really, it's the entrepreneurs that are going to change that. And you're going to say, that's a problem, but let me turn it on its head, and it's a huge opportunity. If you're telling me I have 84% of the world left in the form of a market, that's a huge opportunity, right? So you have the solution. You have the ability to take that problem, stand it on its head, and say, let's go get that part that has not been touched yet. And that, to me, is what social entrepreneurship is all about. So I commend you for what you're doing. I congratulate our students for being involved in this. Susanna is right here. She took a group of students to Peru last year, right? And what did they work on? They worked on a project which would empower the indigenous people there to become more independent. And our students came back, not just having learned about entrepreneurship, but now they want to give back. And that's the best part of what you're all doing. So continue to do what you're doing, and I want to thank you again for being here and for facilitating this. Thank you all.
Okay, I'd like to next have Kay Newberry come up and say a couple of words.
So I'm Kay Newberry. I'm the chair of the accounting department, and they asked me to just speak briefly about what's gone on with the microfinance program here at Bauer. And it's done it a little bit from the outside. I've watched it grow, and I guess one of the things that I learned very early on is that these are not necessarily easy projects. These are complex problems, a lot of barriers that have to be broken down, a lot of work that has to go into it. And you absolutely have to have someone behind this who has the passion and the commitment to see it through and to do this day in and day out. And we've been very fortunate that we have Dr. Saliha Kumawala, because she is definitely the spark of this program. She has worked tirelessly on it for the last years. Some of the fruits are now becoming obvious, but there's been a lot of years of work that have gone into this. So I just wanted to thank you for all your efforts and continuing efforts. And as I've watched Saliha through the years, one of the nice things, I guess, about the social entrepreneurship is it does break down a lot of the silos that we have in universities and in business even. A lot of collaborative efforts, as we're seeing today with MIT, but even some of the initial work that she did, I know we did some things with the University of St. Thomas here in town. You took trips to Africa, India, far-flung reaches of the world, and did a lot of really great things, got some students involved. Now I think as it's matured, one of the things that we've realized is that there are a lot of needs right here in Houston, Texas. There's some underserved communities that could really use our help, and we're right here. And we have our students here, the foot soldiers, so to speak, and we're doing a lot of efforts that are actually very localized right now, literally in our own backyard. And so one of the things that we're doing now, and I'll just give you a little what the students are actually doing in their involvement, and they have amazed us in terms of taking these projects and running with them. But they have developed educational materials where they teach the classes and they teach some of these aspiring entrepreneurs from underserved areas of Houston, what does it take to develop a business idea? What does it take to be successful? How do you come up with a budget? How do you look at your market? All of those business concepts that we work with in a business college. And they do it for people who can use that knowledge. They become consultants. They help them through the process. And those that show that they can really do the projects, because it's not a giveaway. These people have to show that they have the will, that they have the ability, but they work with them and they get them to where they're doing successful businesses. And that's a real plus, not only for Bauer that we can be involved in that, but of course for the city of Houston. And I'm hopeful that with all of our students, I know we have a lot of interest in these programs now, and maybe one of these days, I'm hopeful we'll be getting one of Ashoka Fellows from our own group here, and that you'll be able to be just like our esteemed speakers today. So thank you all for being here. It's very exciting, and I'm looking forward to the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. Ken, could you come up and say a couple of words? Ken Jones?
My remarks will be finished in about an hour and a half. It's nice to have everybody here. For those of you who don't know, I'm the director of the Wolf Center for Entrepreneurship, and I think we all have common goals in mind, and everybody goes about their things. What I find so exciting now, I can speak in a micro way at University of Houston, is that we're trying to get rid of the silos, and we're now all working together. So cross-departmentally, it's really kind of neat. And the social entrepreneurship effort really, to me, is a lot of the thread that's weaving a lot of these things together. So I think it's very, very exciting as we start to embark, because everybody's definition of what social entrepreneurship is, I think, is somewhat meandering. And it's sometimes sexy to have it fall under a certain banner, but to me, it's all about empowering people to take care of themselves. And to me, that's just a very, very exciting thing. I welcome the panel, look forward to your speeches and talks, and it's great to have everybody here today. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. Dr. Kumawala, could you please come up, and I'd like you to introduce the speakers and our moderator.
Thank you. So microfinance is one example of social entrepreneurship. Social entrepreneurship is the process of developing innovative solutions to the problems faced by society today. In contrast to traditional business, which concentrates or focuses only on the bottom line, social entrepreneurship focuses or places greater emphasis on societal, on social, cultural, people, basically, and environmental. So besides just profits, it's profits, people, and planet, the 3 Ps, the triple bottom line. Today we have with us 3 of the world's leading social entrepreneurs, which are Ashoka Fellows, 2 senior representatives from Ashoka, the world's leading organization for social entrepreneurship. We also have with us Mr. Niall Henderson, who will be moderating the panel, and he and Mr. Hansen are responsible for the event today. Speaking about the panel, I'll introduce each one of them as I speak. We start a talk today with Mr. Michael Zacharis. He's the director of the U.S. Venture Program at Ashoka. He manages the search and selection process for Ashoka Fellows. So he's the one, if you are really thinking of becoming an Ashoka Fellow, you really need to know him. He has previously worked for Ashoka in Ireland and Central Europe, has participated on selection panels for social entrepreneurs across the globe, from Montreal to Warsaw to Ireland to Istanbul. Michael has a particular interest in social entrepreneurship in the fields of food and agricultural policy and criminal justice reform. He grew up in Brussels, has worked in California wine industry. He holds a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government. And with that, I leave the floor to Michael. Yes.
Should we stand in front of the mic or do we walk around this one?
Does this one work? Okay, good. I don't know if I need this. I can project. So yeah, I'm Michael Zakaris. I work for Ashoka and have for a number of years. Those of you, hopefully some of you are familiar with Ashoka, but it's the world's largest network of social entrepreneurs. So I've been asked today just to sort of briefly introduce social entrepreneurship, and I like to start with faces because it's really about people and the extraordinary work they're doing around the world. But we've got 3 of them here today too, so I'm not going to spend quite as much time on this. I'll just sort of skip to one particularly fun one, which is Bart Weechens, who's an Ashoka Fellow working in Africa. And this is him along with one of his giant African pouched rats. Bart trains these rats, which have a particularly excellent sense of smell, to detect landmines that have been left over from decades of conflict in East Africa. And the rats are lighter than dogs, so they're less likely to set off mines. More importantly, they're local species, so they're not susceptible to the various diseases that dogs would be. And of course, they're much less expensive than the electronic equipment that you would need to do landmine detecting. So he and his team have cleared thousands and thousands of acres of landmines across several countries. And now they're actually training the rats to be low-cost detectors of early-stage tuberculosis, which is still one of the deadliest infectious diseases around the world. So he's very high on the cool factor scale of social entrepreneur. So it's always fun to have him as an example. Bart is just one of 3,000 Ashoka Fellows, and of course many others working around the world, some of which you're going to hear from today. And so the question is, right, what is a social entrepreneur? And it's true that if you ask that question, you'll probably get a lot of different answers. I'm tempted to sort of open it up and see what you guys think, but I won't put you on the spot quite yet. Ashoka, we have our own version and definition, and really it comes down to, if you look at patterns of social change throughout history, particularly large-scale social change, there's often a person there early on, without whom that change probably wouldn't have happened. And that's really who we consider a social entrepreneur. These are people who make it their life's mission to solve a particular social problem, no matter what. And they do possess the same kinds of characteristics that we often associate with business entrepreneurs, right? It's the innovative thinking, it's the creativity, it's the ability to see your field 5 years ahead of everyone else and kind of know which direction it's going or pull it in a new direction. It's tenacity and passion, but it's applied to tough social problems. And so when Ashoka, when we look at candidates, we look across 5 different criteria, but it really boils down to 2 fundamental questions. The first is this a new or better way of solving a particular social problem? And the second is this idea together with this person potentially transformative. It's that marriage of the 2. Social entrepreneurs, we're looking for people that have the big ideas, that are not just interested in running programs or starting programs. They're really they're challenging the status quo. They're asking, why is it that the world is the way it is, and how can I sort of create a fundamental shift? So in business, you'll hear disruptive innovations, right? This is, think the assembly line, or you can think of examples like Wikipedia or plenty of others, the early personal computers. I mean, these are innovations that really have ripple effects across industries. It doesn't actually matter, certainly not for Ashoka, what kind of organization social entrepreneurs lead. They'll really do whatever makes the most sense for the work that they're trying to accomplish. So in this sense, social entrepreneurs are both visionaries, but they're also deeply practical. They're concerned with the nuts and bolts of sort of how do I accomplish my job. Although, over the last 10 years, certainly we've seen more of a growth of social enterprise and organizations that are doing interesting blended models, whether it's triple bottom line, any way that you can reach sustainability without having to constantly go back to grant makers. And about 60% of staff time in a lot of NGOs is spent trying to raise money. That's a lot of time that you could be spent actually trying to do the work that you're doing. And finally, social entrepreneurs are deeply ethical, and they're highly empathetic people. Ethical because they're asking people to change the way they do things, and they need to be fundamentally trusted. And empathetic in part because, in the obvious way, they're motivated to help people, and they're motivated to improve the human condition. But also in a slightly different way, and maybe less well understood, which is that they apply empathy really well as problem solvers. In this way, they're deeply humble. They go about trying to solve a problem first by asking good questions and by listening. And they develop solutions in ways that create roles for others. It's a really inclusive way, so that people can own that solution. And that's so important for community buy-in and for sustainability. And it may sound pretty obvious, but you'd be amazed how many initiatives and development projects miss that fundamental step. So the field has evolved a lot over the last 30 years. Ashoka was founded about the time of the first personal computer in the early 80s. And back then, no one had heard about the term social entrepreneur. These people existed, but they didn't have an identity. There was no career in social entrepreneurship. There certainly wasn't business school programs. And more importantly, they didn't have support systems. So whereas in business, there was this whole ecosystem set up to help good ideas thrive and be successful. You had venture capitalists, you had angel investors, you had professional networks. If you were a social entrepreneur, you were on your own, right? Most likely you had a day job and you were doing this world transforming work on your evenings and weekends. So, good luck with that. So when Bill Drayton founded Ashoka, he was guided by two insights. The first is that he challenged the notion that business has a monopoly on entrepreneurship, and that was important. And the second is he recognized that these social entrepreneurs needed that same kind of ecosystem to be able to thrive, and that they represented a kind of trapped energy that needed to be released into the world, and they couldn't just do it by themselves. And so that's sort of what Ashoka set out to do. And now, 30 years later, as I said, it's a different world. We've got an abundance of jargon words. It's almost hard to keep them all straight. There are many other organizations and fellowship programs that have evolved to help social entrepreneurs in various ways. You've got university courses and curriculum, global conferences. You've even got programs that provide seed financing for people in 6th and 7th and 8th grade. So we've gone from social what to 7th and 8th graders will talk about themselves as social entrepreneurs. So it's been quite an evolution. Anyway, that's a pretty fast-forwarded history, but just a couple of things in closing about what we've learned. And I could have put a lot of things on here, but just some specific ones that I was thinking of recently. The first is that social entrepreneurs are really good at what they do. These people are often experts in their fields. So sometimes we have to counter this misperception that there's sort of the business entrepreneur and then there's entrepreneur light, which is the social entrepreneur. When you think about the nature of the problems these people are taking on, the size of the problems, and then you think about how few resources they're often operating with, you realize how good they are at getting things done. And so all of us, as we think about, certainly about advancing social change, we should look to them for guidance. And there's a lot that social and business entrepreneurs can do together, especially when we talk about reaching bottom of the pyramid markets. So when you think about using social entrepreneurs as a way to reach into those markets, and again, to have that local community understanding, you can build the greatest app in the world, but maybe people aren't going to use it, right? Because if you don't understand that local context, and if you don't apply empathy in an important way, your solutions may fall flat. The second is that social entrepreneurs are as interested, or more interested, I would say, in spreading ideas than programs. That's an important distinction. They're not out just to build organizational empires, and in many cases, they're not out to do that. And of course you have programs, and of course you need to grow and scale, but really they're trying to change their fields, and they're trying to change the way we think about a particular problem in the first place. And so the programs are a means to get there. And it has real implications for how we measure. For one thing, we're talking about a very different time frame, right? Most social entrepreneurs are looking at 5, 10, 20 years out. It's not about 6 month or quarterly reporting. For another thing, when you're trying to spread an idea, it's good when other people copy you, and it's good when they think that your idea is their idea. That's a sign of traction, right? In fact, one of the ways that we measure success at Ashoka, and we look at how our fellows are doing, is we look at how many of them have had their ideas independently replicated by others. Third, social entrepreneurs are good bang for your buck. For philanthropists out there especially. People will describe Ashoka and Echoing Green and other organizations as doing social venture capital. And in a way they're right, because we're investing in what the world needs, not what it has. And we're doing it through extraordinary people with really lean, effective organizations. And so, when you're doing so, of course there's always going to be a little bit of risk involved, but we need to be more comfortable with risk, I think, especially in philanthropy, and not tell people, look, that's too big and too bold. Why don't you start with a pilot program here? Unfortunately, a social entrepreneur is more likely to hear that from a foundation than a business entrepreneur talking to venture capitalists. That's something that I think needs to change. And finally, as we were talking about just in the opening, the changing job market and sort of is there a test for entrepreneurship? One of the advantages of working with Ashoka and having this incredible alumni network of 3,000 fellows in 70 countries is that you start to see patterns, not just within their work, within their fields, but actually within their life histories. If you ask them, they'll tell you, the interview process can be a little bit uncomfortable, right, Raphael? The first question was, so tell me about your childhood, something like this. It's like, who are these people, right? But one of the reasons we do that is because we want to understand what are the kinds of experiences and skills that people have developed that make them such effective problem solvers. And one of the things that really stands out is that they caught the bug early, right? They did start something. They had that empowering moment. It could have been, it's everything from lemonade stands to high school newspapers that they started or recycling programs. But we realize more and more now, as the global economy is changing, most likely you're not going to learn a trade and do it for 40 years, right? You're going to change jobs a lot. So what are these key skills that are going to make you effective problem solvers? They're going to enable you to navigate relationships in a really globally connected world. I think empathy is one of them, and other kinds of social and emotional skills. I think teamwork and leadership and problem solving are others, and we need to make an effort, all of us, in our institutions, especially in our schools and working with young people, to cultivate those kinds of change-making skills. Because then we're going to have more people who can play roles, not just the sort of 1 in 10 million kind of people that we're seeing in this room today. We can all have a way to play a role, big and small. So let's together think about that and push our institutions to equip kids to walk into the world ready to thrive. So that's the quick introduction, if that's helpful.
Our next speaker is somebody locally from Houston, an Ashoka Fellow, Mr. Rafael Alvarez. He's the founder and CEO of Genesis Works. Genesis Works is a not-for-profit corporation that changes the trajectory of life for underprivileged high school students from one destined to a lifetime of low-wage, dead-end jobs to one in which they participate fully in the economic mainstream. He achieves this by offering students meaningful internships at major corporations during their senior year in high school. From a startup in 2002, Genesis Works has enjoyed a growth rate of over 50% per annum, and from serving just 10 students in Houston in 2002, he now serves over 800 students annually in Houston, St. Paul, Minneapolis, Chicago, and San Francisco. He has received many awards for his work, including recognition by Forbes magazine as one of the world's top 30 social entrepreneurs, his election to become Ashoka Fellow in 2006, his entrepreneurial leadership award at Texas A&M, recognition by President Obama at the launch of the White House Office of Social Innovation, and prior to his non-profit corporation, he spent 11 years in various roles at Compaq Computer, including as a corporate strategist. His ultimate, my husband always says it's the ultimate degree that counts, so his undergraduate is from me. But his MS in engineering management is from U of H, and he's a real cougar.
Sure, can you hear me? Okay, good. Good afternoon. And thank you for that lovely introduction. Don't ever believe what you read in magazines. So some people say that your destiny depends more on which side of the track you were born into. But I'm here to tell you that this is just not true. Over the last 12 years, I have learned that more important than which side of the track you're born into is which track your life is actually on. But more importantly, I have also learned how easy it is to change that trajectory of life for a young student. And I'm going to talk to you about that today. You see, 12 years ago, I was a corporate strategist working for a big company. And as any good professional would do, I volunteered and I served on the boards of the organizations that I was passionate about. And one of them was a charter school that served low-income students here in Houston. And at our graduation ceremony in the summer of 2001, I attended it, and I saw all these kids really happy about graduating. You know that many of them were first in their family ever to graduate from high school, let alone plans for college. So I went down to the floor and I started to talk to them, and I asked a number of them, "What are you going to do?" And they said the same thing. They said, "I'm just going to continue in my job." And I said, "Okay, well, what do you do?" "Well, I'm a cashier, I'm in construction, I'm in maintenance, I'm in fast food." And I thought, okay, so these are good jobs for when they're in high school, but what happens 3-4 years down the line when they've been working these dead-end jobs? How in the world can they switch from that to an occupation that's going to allow them to live in the economic mainstream? Well, they don't. They can't. And so here we go, one more generation of poverty in their family. And yet, that night, when I went down to the floor and I looked into their eyes and I saw their faces, I saw young folks full of promise, full of potential. It's just they had no clue that they can succeed in a different track in life. You see, these kids grow up in environments that might just be 10 minutes from downtown. They might even be able to see that from their school window. And yet, this might as well just be a postcard for many, because they grow up believing that this is not their world, that they can't enter, let alone succeed in this corporate environment. They grow up in environments where success means just being able to get a minimum wage job, hold on to that paycheck for more than that job for more than a few paychecks, and contribute to the family now. The thought of going to college or becoming a professional, it's not even contemplated. But you see, in my corporate job, I knew that if I could just train these students to provide a valuable service to a company during their senior year in high school, could I change their perception? So I thought, okay, let's take a kid like this. And if I train him on IT and put him in a corporation during their senior year of high school, could I get him to look at himself differently? Could I get him to look at himself as a professional? Could change be that simple? And I thought it could. So, but there was only one problem. I wasn't about to become a social entrepreneur. I want to be involved with nonprofits, but quit my corporate job and start a nonprofit? Are you kidding me? I had a good job, I had a good life, had a good family. Why would I mess with that? But then, September 11 happened. Now, most of you in the room are too young to really remember perhaps what you were doing on September 11, but I remember watching the TV and thinking, I could die tomorrow. And if I died tomorrow, what would be my purpose in life? What difference did I make for anyone? And the sad answer at the time was, not much. Not much. So a week after September 11, which happens to be today, 12 years ago, I quit my job. And I quit my big, nice corporate office, and I got a little donated office, and I became a social entrepreneur. My office was so big that there was 2 employees in the company, and you see where the other person sat. And that's an exciting time. I remember praying to God and saying, God, if this is what I need to be doing with my life, I'm good with it. But you better help me, because I have no idea what I'm doing. My business plan, didn't happen. All right? None of what I said in my business plan actually happened. But I was determined to succeed. And even though those first 3 years, a couple years were really, really, really tough, and we almost didn't make it, somehow we did. First year we had 10 students. Second year we had 20. We started to grow. But this is so meaningless unless I tell you the story of one of them. And I want to talk to you about Hector, who's here in the end of the picture, but I explored that a little bit. Hector was a kid that grew up in a neighborhood where, and he says, the only options in life for me were two, were either becoming a thug or becoming a soldier. A thug or a soldier. And by thug, he meant becoming a drug dealer like the rest of his family, his cousins, his community. Well, he didn't want to do that, so he would just want to be a soldier. But he came into our program, and he worked at Reliant, which interestingly enough is the sponsor of this conference today. And so he went into Reliant doing IT, and he realized that it's not that difficult, and that working as a professional is actually an easier path in life than whatever he was going into. And so he decided not to. And with our help and guidance, he went to Texas A&M. Although I have to tell you that now most of our students in Houston come to U of H. But he went to Texas A&M, and his first semester was tough. He had an incredibly bad education, as many of you know. And when he went to A&M, he got a 1.7 GPA that first semester. Remember when he called me, he said, Rafael, I'm dropping out. I just can't do it. It's too hard. But you see, Hector had already worked in the corporate world. He had already seen that he could succeed. He had already seen what is truly possible. And that gave him strength and determination to overcome all barriers and all obstacles. And he learned that he just had to work twice as hard. And he learned the meaning of an all-nighter. Well, he succeeded. A few years ago, he graduated with a 3.0 GPA, cumulative GPA. He got a job in Hewlett-Packard, and today he's a project manager working at HP, making twice as much as his family combined had ever made before. But what's more important here is that his younger sister and his younger brother followed his path. He talks about it saying, I made the decision to go to college, but for my younger siblings, it was no longer a decision. It was an obligation. And so the cycle of poverty in his family has been broken forever. And that's just one story. That's Hector today. This year we served 1,000 students. And when you think about it in the social enterprise world, 1,000 is almost a drop in the bucket compared to other social entrepreneurs that are serving tens of thousands, and you're going to hear from some of them right here. But 1,000 students that actually work for your company, it's almost like having a medium-sized business of 1,000 employees. Think of it like that. Except the difference is that every one of our employees here grew up in a very low-income neighborhood, and every one of them is realizing that they can succeed in the corporate environment. Folks, their lives are not the only ones that have been changed. My life was changed as well. I told my wife I was going to do this for 5 years and then go back to my corporate career. And if I'm smart enough to keep running this organization, I'll stay here for the rest of my life. Because being a social entrepreneur is the most unbelievably rewarding thing that I could ever imagine. Think about this. I wake up every day knowing that between my organization, our great staff, and myself, we're making a difference in the lives of people. We are literally changing the track of life for people. So here you are in the business college, thinking about what to do with your life. I'm going to challenge you with something. And I'm going to challenge you to think about what you're passionate about and how you can get involved to make a bigger difference. Now, you can come up with a great idea and become a social entrepreneur, and that would be fantastic. Hopefully, one day you become an Ashoka Fellow. But you don't have to go that far. Being a professional means helping others and giving back, because you all have benefited from something that's been given to you. And so how are you going to give back in whatever you're passionate about? And to end, I want to end with the slide that I started with. And this is that picture. In this picture, you saw the tracks. You probably saw the tracks in the left-hand side of the picture. Right? But now I want you to think about the right-hand side. And this is the switch, the track switch. And I want you to think for a moment how much force it takes to move this lever. And as a result of that little force, a train that weighs thousands of tons will end up in a whole different city. I want to leave you with this, because as you think about your ideas, think about leverage and think about what you can do with a relatively small investment that's going to create a significant impact in the lives of others. And when you do this, I promise you, your life will be rich. Thank you.
So we have it as another Ashoka Fellow. Jill Violet is the founder and CEO of Playworks, a national not-for-profit that provides play and physical activity to schools around the country and which fosters physical, social, and emotional development of children. Created in 1996, today Playworks is active in over 380 schools in 23 cities, reaching over 300,000 students annually. Last year, 3,500 people in nearly 500 schools took the Playworks training course, which trains adults to become coaches and to bring safe, healthy, and inclusive play to recess periods in low-income schools. With support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Playworks is targeting the goal of operating in 27 cities by 2016, providing play and physical activity to more than 1 million students around the country. She has been widely recognized for her contribution. She was awarded the recipient of the 2013 Irving Award. She is an Ashoka Fellow and was recently named by Forbes as one of the 30 leading social entrepreneurs of the world.
Will you randomly click and show pictures? Let's play a game. All right, so the way the game, because we've been sitting here for a while, so we play a game. The game's called Stand Up, and the way the game works is I'm going to make a series of statements, and y'all should play too. And if the statement is true for you, you're going to stand up, and if standing up isn't working for you, you can just make an upward sweeping gesture to signify your inclusion in the statement being true for you. And if you're in the back and standing, you have to also lean and you have to fully show. Okay? And so you'll stand up for a second, you'll pause, and then you'll sit back down. We'll get a rhythm going, but there'll be sort of an up-down thing going on. If you are a University of Houston undergrad, stand up. I learned to say, I'm supposed to say go Cougs or something. There we go. Thank you. I knew I would do it wrong. Go Cougs. All right, sit back down. If you are a parent, stand up. All right, sit back down. If you are left-handed, stand up. Usually the left-handed people always get really excited about one another. It's really good. Okay, sit back. If you have exercised already today, stand up. Don't hate on them, the non-exercise people. Sit back down. If you've ever sought elected office, stand up. Student government counts. Come on, I'm inclusive here. We're like, all right. All right. Elected office. Come on now. I can see. If I wait long enough. Here we go. All right, keep seeing. The student government people finally come. All right, come on. If you've ever been in a musical, stand up. Wow. Watch, if I stay a little longer, someone else will stand up. You're thinking about it. I can see Hans almost stood up. He didn't. Okay. All right, you can sit back down. Okay, my last one, and this one really only if you're comfortable. If you have any Justin Timberlake on your MP3 player or iPod, stand up. That's right, bringing sexy back. Thank you very much. All right. Why wouldn't we? So I like to start with a game because if you just for a moment, that was such a simple little game, right? No big thing. And yet, if you think about just what your brain was doing while you were playing and how different it is from listening to someone speaking in front of a classroom. And the reality is that most of American education is about someone standing in front of a classroom and didactically dropping knowledge on people in the classroom. But what we know about how the brain works is that state that you were just in when you were playing, where you are engaged and the information that is coming is potentially relevant to you specifically. Really, that is a learning state that is particularly rich. And so the nonprofit that I started, Playworks, really exists to create an environment where education values play and sees play as a way of building environments in schools where kids feel like they belong and where they are drivers of their own education, where they have some sense of control of the world around them and where they feel valued and like it matters. So I started Playworks 17 years ago, and I guess I'm a serial social entrepreneur. It's the second nonprofit I started. I started my first nonprofit when I was 23, the Museum of Children's Art, MoCA, which is alive and well in Oakland, California. It's funny, when you get interviewed, and I'm an Ashoka Fellow, and when you get interviewed, they do ask you, so you were born, and then what happened? Which is a slightly odd question, but I do think, and it was interesting when the dean asked that thing, is there a test? Is there a way to foster this in kids? And I definitely feel like I grew up in an environment where I was encouraged to start things and to be a part of things being generated in a way that my parents didn't consciously do. And it's a funny thing, too, because listening to Raphael, who's made more rational choices in his life throughout, at every turn, basically, than I have, he made a conscious decision. I often describe the process of becoming a social entrepreneur as something that happened to me. I don't know if you've ever read, I've read interviews with novelists who talk about writing a story out and how they'll be describing, they'll be writing about the character, and suddenly the character, who they had big plans for, takes off doing something that they completely did not intend. And often my life has felt like that, but in particular, the nonprofits that I have run have felt like they had this life of their own, and that I was sort of just at the helm, but the way one is at the helm of a sort of wild horse, And I will say, too, just one of the things that's been really extraordinary for me about being an Ashoka Fellow, when Michael was describing it, you're saying, oh, it's these qualities that are like a business entrepreneur. They also sound like someone who's completely insane. And so there's been a nice absence of loneliness in being an Ashoka Fellow, so you weren't having to be crazy all by yourself. And I have really appreciated that. So I started the Museum of Children's Art when I was 23. I went to Harvard. I moved to the West Coast. I worked for 10 months as a stockbroker. I was really involved in the divestiture movement in college. I wrote my thesis on reproductive health care in South Africa. Much to my parents' horror, I slept in a shanty in Harvard Yard while they were paying exorbitant amounts of money for my dorm room around the way. But it was a fascinating education. I wrote my thesis in South Africa on reproductive health care and was there. And it was the first time for me where I'd really come up against a problem where I understood the social issues but couldn't argue the financial issues. And it galled me. And so I climbed into the belly of the beast and became a stockbroker. Worked for a lot of nuns, helping them divest, which was a trippy job unto itself. And I only lasted for 10 months, largely because they really want you to wear shoes when you're a stockbroker, and I found that completely oppressive and too much. So I quit my job as a stockbroker and wrote a business plan for the Museum of Children's Art, which I ran for 9 years. And in the context of doing that, I was out in all these schools, and there was this one moment where I was visiting with this principal, Ms. Payton, and we were in this school in North Oakland, and it was lunchtime, and she's running late, and she comes out of her office with 3 little boys trailing behind her, and she looks cranky the way only an elementary school principal can. She's the neck vein thing going on, and she's scary looking, and the boys look just sheepish beyond, they are just so sad. They had just clearly gotten chewed out. She dismisses them to the secretary, and she ushers me into her office. And I'm there to talk about this artist residency program we're running, but she starts going off about the litany of reasons that recess was hell. How these 3 little boys aren't bad kids, but they're starting to see themselves as bad kids, and how her teachers find every reason under the sun to be anywhere other than the schoolyard at lunchtime. And she's going on, and she's getting more and more worked up, and I'm just sitting there going, ah! And so finally she comes up for air, and she says, can't you do something? And I had some sort of sense of self-preservation, and so I backed away quietly from the crazed principal. But it did get me thinking. And so that next year, I was actually, and at the time too, I think my self-preservation, I was pregnant with my first kid. And so I was like, no, but I did. I was pregnant with my first kid. I quit my job at MoCA, and I started working on starting Playworks, which was initially called Sports for Kids. And I just honestly, I thought it was going to be a local thing. I was going to do it for a little bit. I had a small child, and I was doing my thing. And it just took on a life of its own. And I started getting calls from all over the East Bay where I live, but then California, and then nationally, going along. I got called to be, invited to apply for Ashoka, and that process took like a year. And in conjunction with that, we decided to launch in Baltimore and test that model. But there's a great story where Bill Drayton, who's the founder of Ashoka, was visiting with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And Bill tends to sort of pontificate a little bit. And so he was explaining to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that if there was one scalable solution to the physical inactivity problem in the United States, it was Jill Violet and Playworks. And so and when Bill speaks, people listen kind of thing. And so I get this phone call from, and this does not happen. This is not a good fundraising strategy, but I get this phone call and it's, hi, my name's Nancy Barrand. I'm with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We'd like to talk to you about an aggressive and provocative business plan for national expansion. And I played on the women's national rugby team. So at this point, I become completely convinced it's one of my teammates just yanking my chain. So I do this incredibly suave fundraising thing. I go, okay, who is this really? Which is not a great fundraising strategy. And yet, it worked really, really well. And so there was a back and forth, and they made an initial investment in us of $4.4 million to test the model in 3 cities outside of California. So we launched in Baltimore and DC and Boston, and we made every mistake possible. The widget itself, and what we do is we send, with our direct service model, we send a full-time coach into low-income urban public elementary schools, and they're there from the first day of school, before school, through a full school day, out at every recess, working with classroom teachers, running a junior coach program, a youth leadership program, and then running interscholastic leagues as a way to introduce competition and after-school programming. So it's a very comprehensive, really norming empathy and teamwork and leadership and kindness and getting kids physically active through play and recess particularly. And then we have a training business where we train people in schools where we don't have a full-time staff person to do the same thing. So when we rolled it out into these other cities, we had a fair bit of experience with replication, but the whole reality about scaling and what was required to manage, and my really erroneous presumption that other people opening cities elsewhere would be like me and would think it was really fun to both design the t-shirts and raise the money and hire the staff and negotiate with the school principals and clean up the office. Although Sandra Curfey, who is our executive director here in Houston, would argue that we still actually ask the executive directors to do all those things. We did realize that we needed much more infrastructure to scale. And we narrowly avoided complete catastrophe with those first 3. And we were completely obvious and forthcoming and worked with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in a very transparent, authentic way as partners in scaling. And we had a lot of success despite all the challenges of scaling, and they made another $18.7 million investment in us to go from 5 cities to the 23 that we're in today. Which is a little bit like winning the lottery of like finding the incredible investor partner for scaling expansion. That being said, with that $18.7 million investment they made in us came a need to raise an additional $20 million. It didn't cover the full costs. And so we've been doing that through a lot of different ways. Currently we have a staff of about 600 full-time staff in the 23 offices doing both direct service and training. And we have a model which really mixes and blends fee for service, so earned income, with donations, private foundations, individuals, corporations. And we really do try and figure out how to partner so that we ultimately achieve sustainability. I was going to say that there were a couple of questions about what's our impact and then what do you see social entrepreneurship, and then I'll turn it back over. Our impact and our ability to show our impact has been extraordinarily important, in part because the work we do, play and recess, is easy at first blush to dismiss as being sort of lacking in gravitas. But I would argue that nothing could be further from the truth. And we just completed a 2-year randomized control trial conducted by Mathematica Policy Research and Stanford University, the U of H of the West. And they found a number of statistically significant impacts. Looked at 29 schools, 17 that had Playworks, 12 that didn't, randomly selected across the country. And they found that teachers reported 43% less bullying at Playworks schools. They found that kids reported feeling safer throughout the school day, significantly safer at Playworks schools, which is fundamental to kids' learning. We know that to be true. They found that kids were vigorously, there was almost 50% more vigorous physical activity at Playworks schools than at non-Playworks schools. And the last one, and it's an interesting one from just a purely sort of business school approach, we found we were recovering about 24 hours of instructional time in every one of the Playworks classrooms. And so if you're just going to monetize one thing about public education, it's instructional time. That's the thing that we're really paying for. And so a 24-hour recovery of instructional time in every class represents about 200% return on the cost of the program. So, it's funny, we run this very playful, and we have organization and program, and we have this very exuberant culture, but you would be mistaken if you thought that we weren't incredibly serious professionals who take the business aspect of our work seriously. And in large part, we do that because we feel a tremendous sense of accountability, not only to our investors, but more importantly to the kids and the families and the teachers and the principals we serve. So for me, the definition of social entrepreneurship is really one of using, having a goal of social change, which you use business practices to achieve. And so I will conclude just with the one thought, that for me, ultimately, the goal isn't to build the biggest possible Playworks. The goal is to really change the system to this one-day vision that every child in America gets to play every day, and that we are building schools that work because we are taking into consideration how playing together helps us to grow up to become the citizens we so desperately need our kids to be. And so having that vision and managing to outcomes and really running a business, which happens to be about recess, I think makes us a really great example for thinking about how social entrepreneurship can really work well within systems. So with that, I'll turn it over.
So our next speaker is another Ashoka Fellow, Catherine Lucy. And while I was reading up on you, I was always thinking about Professor Rosa's and Suzanne Rosa and her Sales for Social Impact class, because the project that the students worked on was on energy. So let me tell you about what she did. You can directly, you and your students will just connect it right away. So she's the founder and CEO of Solar Sister, an award-winning social enterprise eradicating energy poverty through the power of women's enterprise. Solar Sister is currently active in 3 countries, Uganda, Nigeria, and Tanzania, with 400 entrepreneurs who have brought solar light to over 50,000 people in sub-Saharan Africa. She has been honored for her work with Solar Sister by CGI, Clinton Global Initiative, the United Nations, the US State Department. Catherine is an Ashoka Fellow. She's a Draper Richards Kaplan entrepreneur. She's a graduate of the Global Social Business Incubator of Santa Clara University. And the most important thing, she enjoyed a 20-year career on Wall Street, specializing in structured finance. She holds a Bachelor of Journalism from the University of Georgia and an MBA from Georgia State. She lives in Rhode Island.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Is this working fine? Be here with you today. I was thinking about the question about can you find entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship? Can you train for that? Can you look for that quality? Is there an EQ, an entrepreneurship quotient out there that we look for? And I think that's a great question, because that's one of the things that I do every day. I am recruiting, training, and supporting women to become entrepreneurs, women who are living in rural areas of Africa. We are training them specifically to become clean energy entrepreneurs so that they can bring energy access to their communities. And so what Solar Sister is doing has really two missions to it. One is providing clean energy access for people who are living off the grid, people who are using kerosene for light rather than flipping a switch. And we're replacing that kerosene lamp with a solar-powered lamp, which is more efficient, it's safer, it's cleaner, and probably most importantly, it's more economical for the family, and so they're saving money that then goes into typically sending their children to school. And so the work that I do, I see this ripple effect of impact of the women that I work with are earning income, and are fulfilling for themselves an opportunity to really provide for their families, and that's an incredibly important thing to do meaningful work and do it well, and know that what you're doing is having an impact on your very own family as well as a broader impact. And also bringing clean energy access to people who have really, no energy access. And so giving them opportunity to brighten their lives, really bring light into someone's life, is just completely transformational. I got into this sort of, one of the things that I think of is that for anything that you do, but especially doing something like social entrepreneurship, you should do what you can, where you are, with what you have. Which sounds kind of funny because I live in Rhode Island, I work in Africa. It sounds like I didn't follow my own path very well. But actually I did, because I had spent a long career on Wall Street working with building large, huge power plants, $2 billion at a time, investing to build electricity access for people, often in developing countries or more further along the way, emerging markets. And it gave me an appreciation for the power of what energy is all about. I also saw the flip side of that, the dark side, which was, as we were building these huge power plants, giving access to countries and to communities to have electricity, often what was happening was that electricity was going towards the cities, or it was going towards industry, or it was going towards a particular company who was probably owned by the cousin of the president. And what we saw was up against the plant, right next door to the power plant that we had just built, would be a shanty town of people who were living with kerosene lamps and had no access to electricity at all. And I can remember that particular image, and I can't say that I had a moment of obligation at that moment, but I do remember that image. And when I retired from banking for personal reasons, to stay home with the kids, and decided to get a little bit involved with philanthropy, it did come about that I came across an organization that was doing rural electrification in Africa. And because of my background in electricity, it very much appealed to me. I got involved with them, and with them ended up one day in rural Uganda putting solar panels on a woman's house. Rebecca and Charles own this house, and we were going into the house, a small typical African house divided into 4 rooms. Actually a fairly large house for that community. Charles was the pastor of the community, and so he had a larger home than most. And we were installing what was a 3-light system, and they had 4 rooms. So they have to make a choice, which room is going to be the dark room, which room's not going to get the light. And Charles had decided already that his room, where he's a pastor, and so people come to see him, and he's going to put a light in sort of his office. They were going to put a light in the main room where all the living and the cooking and everything gets done. That makes sense. And they were going to put a light in their bedroom, so they would have a light, as they were going to bed at night. And Rebecca stood up and said, well, no, that really makes absolutely no sense. That's not what we're doing. We're putting 1 light outside the front door, because when I come home from the garden at night, it's dark and it's scary and it's not safe. So 1 light outside the door will make it much safer for me to come back from the garden. And we're going to put 1 light in the main room. You got that right. We're going to put 1 light in the main room where I do all the cooking, because you want to eat well, and I can only cook well if I can see what I'm doing. And then we're going to put the 3rd light in the other room. And the other room, the 4th room that he was going to leave dark, was the room where they keep all their chickens. Because what Rebecca knew is that chickens will only eat when they can see. And so by giving the chickens 4 more hours of light at night, they were eating better. They're catching little bugs and things like that to eat. Because they ate better, they were healthier, they laid more eggs, and Rebecca took the eggs to market and she made more money. And she brought that money home, and then she invested it in a goat, she invested it in her garden, she invested it eventually in a cow. Now Rebecca has this incredible farm thriving in her community. People come along and say, you're doing pretty well, what's going on here? And she became this local source, and everyone asked her how she was doing so well. She decided she must be smart enough to run a school. So she opened up a school, and now she has a school with 100 students who are learning reading and writing and arithmetic, your usual subjects, but they're also learning small plot farming. And so they're learning how to keep a cow in a small pen, because when they grow up, the population growth is so much there in Uganda. When they have a farm that they'll inherit from their family, it's going to be 1/10 of the size of their parents' farm, because it has to be divided between 10 children. And so for them to be farmers, they have to learn how to farm on small plot farming. And that's part of the curriculum of this school. The light today, this was 10 years ago when I first met Rebecca, and that light is still working. I think the bulb has been replaced, but the system is still working. The room where the chickens used to be kept is now a classroom, and learning goes on there. And she even has evening classes for women in her community who have never had the opportunity when they were children to learn how to read. So they come in the evening, of course, when their work is done, to learn to come to literacy classes. And so when I was there several years ago, I was there for the first woman graduate of the Impidgee Women's Literary Society, I guess you would call it. And she graduated from P4, which means like primary 4. So that's really the age of fluency when you start reading. And she was a beautiful, tall Ugandan woman wearing her best dress with the pointy shoulders. I don't know if you know these dresses, but as elegant as it can be for her graduation from her class. All of that was bound up with one light bulb that went into a home. And it's really that kind of impact from such a small intervention that triggered me to think, well, if it's so easy, if you could just give somebody light and all of this flows, all of this comes about, well, let's do that. What's stopping us? And so that's where I was at that moment with what I had, which was a background in electricity, to do what I could, which is let's give people access to light. It seems so easy. Well, that started me down this whole social entrepreneurship thing. And I realized, you know what? Only later did I realize it's really not easy at all. It's actually quite difficult. I should be clicking these while I'm doing this. That it's incredibly difficult. And I was a banker for many years. I love puzzles. I love to put together diagrams. I love numbers. And so I had the whole business side of it down. I had this, talk about a business case. I have a great business case. I have a beautiful model, and it works. If you look at what Solar Sister does on paper, it's actually a very simple model. I mean, we're sort of like Avon ladies, but instead of cosmetics, we're selling light and phone chargers and clean cook stoves and other technologies into communities. You buy low, you sell high, there's a margin, it funds the work, it works. But that's until you get the people involved. And then once you start getting people involved, all of that nice business case kind of like falls off the page. And that's when a few years after started doing this and started realizing I'm really not in the clean energy business, and I'm really not in the the women's empowerment business. I am in the people business. I'm in the problem solving business. Every day I wake up, and if there is one thing that you look for, what makes an entrepreneur, do they solve problems? And do they love to solve problems? Because that is all it is from morning till night. As you wake up every day and it's like, oh, what fun problem are we going to have today? And that's how you can decide if somebody's a social entrepreneur or not. If they want to go home at bed at night and think that they've put everything tidy and put it over to the side, it probably won't work out so well. The women that I meet in our business are also entrepreneurs at every level. And what we do is we provide them training and learn how to become entrepreneurs for clean energy business. And it very much is problem solving training. We teach them how to solve problems. We teach them how to encounter an obstacle and not just stop dead in your tracks, but realize that you can get to the other side of it. You can go over it, you can go around it, you can go through it, you can go under it, and you can have the power in yourself to figure out how you're going to get to the other side. That you don't sit back and wait for somebody to solve it for you. And for the Solar Sister Entrepreneurship Training, that is really at the core. And when I think of empowerment, which is what we're training them, that is what is at the core, is learning how that what you have inside of you is going to get you where you need to go. The bringing light to people is the impact that we're looking to do, but it's really applicable for any of the social enterprises that I've even heard here today. So I think if there's one thing I would leave you with social entrepreneurship is love problem solving. Wake up every day looking for that problem. Inside that problem is the kernel of your success. Thank you.
Forward and backwards?
Yeah, I think so.
Makes sense.
No.
Oh, yes. So with that, I must tell you that I had the privilege of listening to 3 of our 5 panelists yesterday evening, and an additional bonus time that I had with them over dinner. Where do you get that time with Ashoka Fellows and senior Ashoka representatives? I consider myself very, very honored and privileged. And with that, I want to introduce our last panelist for this evening, Hans Hickler. He's the founder and CEO of Ellipsis Advisors, which provides executive-level advisory services and executive-level coaching. He has served as CEO of 3 multinational corporations, including Asia Pacific Agility Logistics, covering 20 countries and 7,000 employees. CEO of DHL's Global Customer Solutions, leading the development and sales of customer solutions across a wide spectrum of DHL businesses, and CEO of DHL Express USA and CEO of APL Logistics. He's recognized as a leader in the logistics and transportation industry and has received the prestigious Executive of the Year award by the Strategic Account Management Association. He's a member of the Young Presidents Organization. He's a member of the Ashoka Support Network, a very powerful network. Super. I think people are fortunate to have you there. In the domain of social entrepreneurship, Hans works with Ashoka to support and advise social entrepreneurs worldwide and has been instrumental in the creation of advisory boards supporting frontline social entrepreneurs. He is particularly interested in the importance of empathy in business and works with clients on embedding the concepts of social profit and shared value into business planning. He's a graduate of Brown University, and with that,
U of H. I'm told I have to use this. So I'm going to address you as the people that aren't going to be social entrepreneurs, but are going to be CEOs. Okay, and I spend a lot of time talking to CEOs about the importance of empathy and vulnerability as a leadership trait. And my wife, when I told her I'm going to start talking to CEOs about that, she looked at me with this stunned deer in the headlights look, which meant one of 2 things. How could you possibly talk about empathy? Or how could they possibly want to listen about that subject? I prefer it was the second one, but I think it was the first. I'm not sure I was the most empathetic CEO, but through working with Ashoka, I've learned a little bit. So I title this, Helping to Create a World of Change Makers. Ashoka talks about the fact that every one of us has to be a change maker if we're going to change the world. And if we're going to take this bottom of the pyramid of 3 billion plus people out of misery into sustainability. And I always say that, you know, as CEOs, we manage a lot of people, a lot of lives, and a lot of families. So we're very influential as business people in changing the world. You know, at DHL, I manage 20,000 people, so that's 20,000 families. So if I can just influence them in one way a little bit towards empathetic and understanding the value of changing the communities they live in, then I can have a lot of influence. So, you know, I talk a lot about shared value to CEOs, and I talk a lot about empathy and vulnerability. And I'll give you an example. As a CEO of DHL, if I'm empathetic and I understand that I have a leadership obligation to make the world a better place, and that I have authority as a CEO to do that, here's a couple of things. He's in the business of getting interns from big business. I'll never talk to him unless I understand what he's trying to do and that he's really in the business of changing the world. Okay? The next fellow is in the business of, you know, teaching kids empathy and the value of play. And I argue with CEOs that the same trait that makes a young child stand up with courage to bullying in the playground is exactly the trait that I would hire in a leader. That's the same. It's a one-for-one match. People who are empathetic, who are transparent, gain the trust of their teams, and they create high-performing teams. And if we talk about women's education and the importance of women, you know, there's a saying that says, you educate a boy, you change a life. You educate a woman, you change a village. And at Agility in Asia, I ran 22 countries. And I put into my business plan that we will build a school for women in every country we serve in 4 years. And that was in my business plan, and that was the people planet part of my business plan, of the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. So as a CEO, I have the ability to impact change. And just, you know, I didn't know these people before I came here, but as a leader, there's hardly anything I can't do if I'm willing to be a change maker. And so that's the business I'm in today. I left my job as CEO. I made a lot of money, and I spend 50% of my time helping Ashoka, and I spend the other 50% of the time teaching CEOs that they can be much better leaders and be very impactful and change. So, I listen. You're the future of leadership going forward. And if you think that you can't make a change, that one person can't make a change, the Dalai Lama says, if you believe that one person can't make a change, tell that to a mosquito. Okay? So the bottom line is we are all change makers. It's just figuring out how to use the skills we have to do that. And I love my job now, and I don't define myself by the positions I had. I define myself about waking up in the morning, and I do 20 minutes of meditation in the morning first, just because of this people business world. I need 20 minutes of silence before I start dealing with people. So throughout my slides, you're going to see some pictures. All of these are me working with a fellow in Brazil, Vera Cordeiro. She helps single mothers with chronically ill children that live in the favelas of Brazil. The favelas are the slums. That favela is Rocinho, 120,000 people in 1 square kilometer on this hill. It's a horrible place to live, but these people are incredible people that live there, have incredible fortitude and an incredible desire to make their life better. Vera has a project called Saúde Criança, which means child health in Portuguese. And she has a 2-year plan that takes women from absolute misery with very sick children over 2 years to complete self-sustainability. And she does that by providing medical help, gets the kids into education, psychological help, legal help, and it's a whole 2-year plan. She's taken 15,000 families out of misery. She's saved thousands of lives, and just an amazing woman. She's an angel, really. And I work with her. I go down to Brazil every 2 months and spend 2 weeks working with her and her team to build her organization. She's helped 15,000 families, but our plan in the next 5 years is to take that to 150,000 families in Brazil. I'm a member of the Ashoka Support Network. What does that mean? It means I wish I had had a really good idea. I wish I was good enough to be a social entrepreneur, but I haven't had a single good idea. So I do the next best thing. I help them out. So the Ashoka Support Network, there's about 300 of us, and we're all executives and CEOs, and we're available to the social entrepreneurs to help them. So that could be anything from I'm a logistics expert. If one of them has a supply chain issue, they might call me up. Or it could be something as simple as I need help with a business plan, or I'm doing a fundraising deck. These guys are amazing business people, but on top of running a business, they're actually in the business of saving the world. So if I can help them accelerate, if I can help them scale, if I can give them a little bit of that stuff that I do every day as a business person, make their life easier or help them scale better, that's my job. And that's really what I tell CEOs when I encourage them to join this network, is I say the things we do every day, the skills we have, are hugely valuable to these social entrepreneurs. Some of them are very, very young people, your age. They've never learned how to run effective meetings, build teams, hire talent, think how to grow organizations, build business plans. So that's where we come in, and we're a resource for that. So, the opportunity for people like me is that we can share our skills and we create a network that helps. I think we become better leaders. I think by doing this work, I've become a better leader, a more empathetic leader, until I quit my job. And there's a lot of ways for all of us to engage in social entrepreneurship. So I'm with Ashoka, but you heard from Michael that there's a lot of avenues. And I would encourage you, if you haven't had a taste for it, try it. As an ASN, for example, many ASNs only dedicate 2 or 3 hours a month. A fellow calls them up and says, hey, I need a couple of hours. Can you help me think through a problem? That's good enough. That's how I started for my first 2 years. I've been with working with Ashoka for about 5 years. And then, I changed my life and said, I went deep. I caught the bug and went deep. I helped design a concept of advisory boards for Ashoka. So instead of one fellow working with one CEO, we created this concept of having an advisory board of CEOs. So there's 4 or 5 of us that are the advisory board for Vera. And we each have different skill sets, and we bring all of our network to bear. So all of a sudden, she doesn't have a schmuck like Hans working one-on-one giving her advice. She's got a panel of very successful people that have global influence, global network to help her. And that's become, I think, a very important part of Ashoka. We've developed an investors club. Many of us are early-stage investors. And, in the network, and so now we're leveraging that and creating investors clubs to invest in Ashoka Fellows. So, we bring certain habits and talents to bear, and we're trying to figure out new ways to help the fellows. And Ashoka also does more than just supporting the fellows. There are Ashoka universities that are accredited as changemaker universities, a very difficult process to go through. There's a youth venture program that supports 16 to 20-year-olds, I think, is it, Michael? Youth venture? 12 to 20. So social entrepreneurs, and Ashoka supports them. All kinds of stuff going on. My story is I joined in 2008, and I was sort of in the ad hoc assistance. I was living in Singapore, and I'd schedule a Skype call at 2 in the morning to help a fellow, and that was really rewarding. Then I introduced it to my YPO organization. It's an organization of CEOs, and after 3 years, half of my YPO chapter is now involved with social entrepreneurship. Our kids have interned with them. So, I warn you, if you do decide to do anything with Ashoka, they grab you and they pull you in, and they never leave you. It's a bug in your heart, one that I love, but it's strong. We created the advisory boards, and then I started deeper mentoring. I started to go, rather than wide and narrow, I went shallow and, narrow and deep, I guess. I support about 5 fellows very deeply. I fly to Brazil, and this is me mentoring Vera and her team. We do everything from talent management reviews to business planning, to finding new facilities and getting the funding for them, and selecting board members, whatever they need help with. And it's really rewarding. Not all of us as ASNs go this deep, but I went deep. I went to the doctor one time, and I broke my neck many years ago, and many years later, 3 years ago, the doctor said, if you don't change your lifestyle, you may have some real problems with your neck. And I said, well, I'm going to change my lifestyle. And he said, well, I don't believe you. I talked to 3 CEOs a week, and none of you change your lifestyle. And I said, well, I'm sort of ready. I want to do more with Ashoka. So at the doctor's office, I called the chairman and said, I quit. I was the CEO of a company running 7,000 people in Asia, and I was in Fort Lauderdale, and I called him up in Kuwait and said, I quit. And he goes, you can't quit. And I said, no, it's not going to happen to me. I value my health too much. And by the way, I want to spend 50% of my time in Rio de Janeiro helping Vera and the other Ashoka fellows. And that's when I went deep, and I haven't regretted a moment of it. I really love it. We've since launched the Global Ashoka ASN Summit. It's a global summit. We just had our second one in London, where as many of us can come together, and we work with the fellows, and we create agendas for how can we be more productive and help the fellows and embed ourselves even more productively. I do a lot of speaking engagements on social entrepreneurship and shared value. My mission is really to educate CEOs on social entrepreneurship and the concept of shared value. And you're absolutely right. Your dean talked to you about, these $3 billion is an untapped market. It's absolutely right. I really believe that good business is good business. And if you can provide a service or a product to the underserved, not only are you tapping into a market that nobody's going after, but you're changing the world. And why wouldn't you do something that does both financial good for you and changes the world? And that's the concept of shared value, and I spend a lot of time on it, and I'm very eager to share that. And that's sort of my story. There's 300 of us. We try to support these folks as much as we can. I'll be glad to answer any questions after this is over. Thanks.
Okay, well, I think that was a fabulous panel. I hope you enjoyed the speakers. We have a little bit of time for questions and answers. I was going to ask a few questions, but I think it's much more appropriate for yourselves to ask some questions. A couple of the speakers over lunch whispered in my ear saying that they love to talk to students. So, I think they will very much value your questions. So if any of you have a question, now's your chance.
I didn't hear a whole lot about the political context of your work. I mean, you actually all sound studiously apolitical. And I'm wondering if you see it necessary for a social entrepreneur to also be a political activist, or if you think the kind of social issues that you address, poverty, can be solved by applying market forces to achieve economic efficiency through private initiative. Is that all it takes? Or should we be political activists and addressing some of the systemic issues that create poverty and oppression in the societies in which we work?
So guess which one is the Republican and which one is the Democrat?
So we're in your home state, and we're not in California. You come to visit me, I'm not going to doubt you like that.
Well, I'll start just as a premise. About 40% of the Ashoka Fellows, after 5 years of work, have impacted social policy in the country where they work. So they may not have a direct political affiliation, but there's a strong correlation to the work of social entrepreneurs and their ability to create systemic change, much of it through the public policy regime. So I think, to me, that's the most important piece. There's a lot of interplay with the public sector, between the public sector and the private sector and the NGOs. But I think the most important testament of that is it's about creating systemic change, and systemic change doesn't really happen very well without engaging, the public sector. So it doesn't answer your question completely, but I think there's a strong correlation there.
I'll take a pass. So we have a 3-part path to scale mapped out for really achieving scale. And the first part, by design, was to get to the 27 cities and on the ground. And it is my belief about how systemic change happens in education that teachers and educators really want to see you walk the walk. And folks just dropping in saying, hey, this is a great idea, y'all should do it, doesn't fly with teachers. And so we really wanted an on-the-ground presence, modeling that what we do has impact and showing that it has impact. And we very intentionally chose not just to be on the coasts and then not just to be in a certain size city. Really, we've chosen, we're all over the country, very much by design. Second part of our path to scale is the training business. And the way we've scaled training, we have commission-based salespeople who are out there selling training. Training covers its own cost. It enables us to really have a broad adoption strategy that's not reliant upon charity, fundraising, donations to make it happen. And so that's by design. The third piece, and by far the most nascent part of our path to scale, is a movement building piece. And if you'd asked me probably 10 years ago how we were going to go about the movement building piece, I would have talked to you more about politics. I would have talked to you more about federal policy. My experience with public education is that public education is largely determined by local politics, and so we have been trying to work very much school board by school board. We've done some state policies in states that are smaller than Texas and California. Colorado, we've had a lot of play at the state level. We do some federal advocacy work. Right now, there's a lot of gridlock. It's not, I feel like I could also, if I had started Playworks, I could have been teaching folks in Congress how to do rock, paper, scissors and probably having a lot of impact there too. It is fundamentally, school finance is fundamentally political. And we, by virtue of getting federal funding for AmeriCorps, that's fundamentally political. And so we're not naive. I am at my core practical. And ultimately, my responsibility is the kids out in those schools and making sure that we change the system for them. So if I can change it through market forces, I'm going to do that. If I have to work politically, I will do that. But ultimately, I look for where I'm getting the most traction. And right now, political opportunities seem to offer less traction.
Another question? Sure.
I have a question about USAID. My company, Forward Movement, is a social business. We've launched 10 projects this year, benefiting 30,000 people in the land of Malala, the Pakistani teenager. And we come across, and this is in the area of water purification, sanitation, and disease prevention. We come across USAID people who are doing somewhat similar work, and they think they're doing social entrepreneurship. We have stayed away from governments generally, and that includes USAID. My question from the Ashoka folks are, I've read David Bernstein's book and the accounts of the various achievements that Ashoka folks do around the world. Does USAID work social entrepreneurship?
Is anyone here from USAID? That's not a trick question, right? I'm sure there are some, fellows around the world, and we have 3,000 fellows in 70 countries, so it's very easy to rub shoulders and to come across USAID. I don't know of a lot of fellows that are funded by USAID, but it sounds to me like what you're asking is, do we think of the work that USAID is doing as being sort of social entrepreneurial work? I would say not very often. There are certainly innovative initiatives or sort of more creative initiatives than not, but that's not usually a place where we turn, or where I think a sector would turn to identify sort of community-rooted sustainable solutions. I think again, and I'm not an expert. I think USAID has improved over the years, but still a lot of our you've heard a lot of us talk about empathy today. I think understanding the local context and again creating solutions where there's roles for people in the community really is a key piece of sustainability that has been a huge missing piece of USAID's work, and it's still a missing piece in a lot of philanthropy. We're getting very excited about philanthrocapitalism today, but unfortunately, philanthrocapitalism isn't always defined by humility or by empathy either. It's sort of the clipboard approach of you show up and you think you've got the answers. But one of our other ASN, Ashoka Support Network members in the Bay Area, I was speaking with him recently, and that was his initial approach, was to kind of come with the business mentality, let's kind of figure this out. And what he realized after spending some time overseas was, the best thing I can do is ask good questions and still figure out what are the right questions to ask and to listen. And work with people instead of work for them. And that's, again, an important distinction. So hope that helps you answer a little bit.
So I actually am an example. We do have USAID funding, and we got it through their Development Innovation Ventures program, which is specifically geared towards organizations like ours that are trying to do something new and different. So they have, they're not the typical USAID mentality, I think. They have a lot higher risk appetite and a lot better tolerance for failure, which is not something you typically find within government funding. And it's been a good partnership for us. They came in with a pretty big chunk of funding to get us just past the pilot stage, which is very unusual. And it's one of the things that they are holding us to, which is not a bad thing, it's a very good thing, is very rigorous analysis and testing of what we're doing. And it's not so important if we fail or succeed. What's important is that we really look at what we're doing and understand if we failed, why, and how do we do it better next time? Or perhaps how do they do it better next time? It may be that they go on to take the learnings that they had with us and apply that to some other organization that they fund in the future. So it comes with requirements, pretty strict requirements about reporting and data collection and metrics, but it is not a very strict requirement as far as kind of the typical, you have to be 100% successful or we're not going to give you the money. So it's been a good experience for us.
Another question? Yes. After listening to your story, I noticed that all just like you, most of you all had very difficult beginnings. Some of you had almost near-death experiences and so on. So you have all got a valuable amount of knowledge and skills you've learned over a period of time. Is there any group or any where this information is available to other social entrepreneurs to come and say, hey, I'm starting out, can I share, can I learn from you, can I share some of your knowledge? Because that will allow others to start up quicker, faster, and not make the same mistakes.
It's as a mom, my experience with my kids has not been that my sharing past mistakes prevents them from making those mistakes over again. But I do think Ashoka itself is a great network, and if you go on the Ashoka website, they've done a really great job of chronicling stories. But it's that experience is a very hard thing to get to share. And honestly, on some level, a lot of the mistakes that I made, people warned me about that I was going to make them, and it wasn't like I didn't see them coming. It's not that what. And I don't really regret making a lot of those mistakes. Like I think I needed to make them for myself in that very human way. So.
And I want to talk about Joe here.
My mistakes.
Because I've learned so much about your mistakes. In fact, I continue to learn about your mistakes. No, so you became an Ashoka Fellow, what, 2006? No.
No.
No, because I became 2006 and you gave the
You guys
speech.
think yourself.
She was already a fellow, which obviously was unforgettable for her. And I remember here when I became a fellow, our organization was, I don't know, $600,000 in budget. It wasn't a huge organization at all. And I remember listening to Jill talk about, the huge organization that she had. And what was amazing to me is that when I reached out to Jill and said, Jill, hey, do you mind if we meet? Can you help me? Can you give me advice or whatever? She never has hesitated to just, give us advice. Well, I mean, we're 20 times larger now than we were then, and they're still 20 times larger than us. But every step of the way, in this network of social entrepreneurship, we learn from one another. And so what I've learned from her is to pay it forward. So now, and I hope I don't regret this, but I get called from university students all the time, all over the country. They're working on a social entrepreneurship paper and say, can I have half an hour of your time? And I remember Jill, and my assistant knows that when anybody asks me, yes, the answer is yes. Now we just need to figure out when to schedule it. But I help students around the country that I've never met and I'll probably never see again. And so that is the beauty of social enterprise and this ecosystem that we're creating, that we do help one another.
I'd like to somewhat piggyback on that question. We have 12 students in my class and some alumni from a class that's called Sales for Social Impact. And we hear these great stories, and they're probably not asking questions because 10 years ago when I was in college, we didn't have this. So we're very thankful for that because they have the opportunity to learn today. They've learned a lot of amazing stories, but the majority of you came from industry, went out and worked, and the majority of our students are like Rafael's students, where many of them are first-generation college graduates. What's your advice to them if they do have this amazing idea? Because I always tell them I learn more from them than I teach, and so they have some amazing ideas, but knowing their background, knowing where they came from, what's some advice that you can give them if they have these great ideas and now know of this great network that they can tap into?
Well, let me start and then I'll be done with Mark. So I was in a panel one time and somebody asked the panel, the risks that you took were unbelievable. How'd you manage that risk? And I was thinking about my answer, and I'm glad somebody else responded. Amidar, who founded Idealist.org. And Amidar takes the microphone and says, risk? He goes, what risk? He goes, I can tell you who's taking risks. The men and women in the front lines in Afghanistan and Iraq, now they're taking risks. We're not taking risks. So what's the worst thing that can happen, if our venture doesn't succeed, right? Well, we'll go get a regular job, which is what everybody else in the country is doing, right? And so not a whole lot of risk. So my big advice to you would be, you're young, you don't have a lot of needs. Hopefully you don't have, you're a father, I saw you stand up for that, but you may not have a lot of responsibilities. This is a great time to act on your passion, because you don't have a lot to risk. So if you have a good idea and it makes sense, believe that you are smart enough, believe that you are gutsy enough, and believe that when you do it, people will come to help. When you're doing good things do happen. And so don't be afraid of risk, because the worst thing that can happen is you go get a regular job, which is, again, what all your peers are doing.
Yeah, I would echo that and double it. I think like I said, I'm numbers and charts and pro con kind of person. I put it all on paper, and definitely because the biggest, most important choices I've made in my life, the most successful, best choices I've made in my life, are the ones where I did all that pro and con and then I ripped the paper up because I didn't like what it told me. And so, becoming a social entrepreneur, starting a business in Africa, when you have 5 children at home and a husband that's like looking at you like you're a crazy person, it's probably not the best idea to go do, and yet it's been, the most rewarding. And so just do it. Just go out there and do it. There's nothing, you will fail, but you know what? That's your learning process. So don't think that, oh, what if I do this, I'll fail. I'll take that, don't worry about that. You're going to fail. Just get over it and move on and do the next thing. Because it doesn't matter, again, it doesn't really matter if you succeed or fail, because it just matters that what you do after that. So go do what your heart is pulling you to do. Because I agree with you very much. If you're doing the right thing, if you're in that path that's right for you, resources come to you, people come to you, it all comes together. So go for it.
Yeah, I would say that what your passion is, what floats your boat, doesn't really change over time. It just sometimes takes us a long time to go with our gut. 6 years ago, I went through this exercise with a bunch of good colleagues to try to determine whether I should take another CEO job in Asia or whether I should just do what I'm doing now, which is quit and dedicate myself to Ashoka. And I did the whole wealth thing. I said, I'll work 5 more years, I can make a lot more money, and then I'll do it. Well, a year later, I made the decision, and it was forced by, I think it was forced by my neck, diagnosis, but it really wasn't. It was just a kick in the ass that said, just do what you want to do. And I really I wish I'd done it many, many years ago. And if you'd asked me at any time in my career, do I love what I'm doing? I'd say I had the best job I could ever have. I loved my work. But it wasn't fulfilling. It was all, I would do the fulfilling stuff later, and I regret that a lot. And I really enjoyed everything I did. But at some point, you got to do what your heart tells you or what your passion says. And we try to put that off. We always say, I got the pressures now. I'll do it when I'm more financially stable, or when the kids are a little older, whatever it is. Well, it doesn't get easier. That's for sure. The decision doesn't get easier, so you might as well just take it.
I think we've got time for maybe one more question. There's one here.
Hi, my name is Ana Tinajero, and I'm part of the Social Impact class this semester. And I have a question, I guess, directed towards you, Catherine. It's about, what about when you have this idea and you think it's amazing, but what about when you go try implement it and you are against barriers of social opinion in that place? For example, in Africa, or for us that we're going to Peru, how do you overcome those traditions and all that?
So the very first thing, when I had my bright idea, to women's entrepreneurship and access to energy, and you could put the two together, because the idea was that if you're going to provide access to energy at scale, the only way you can do that is through a business, because philanthropy is just not big enough in the world to solve this problem. So we have to have a business. If we're going to have a business, the first question you ask is, who's your customer? And I looked around at the households and realized it's women who are managing energy in the household. They're the ones who collect the wood, buy the kerosene, do all of that. So then the woman is our customer. She's making that daily decision. How do I spend my money? Do I buy 2 Coke bottles worth of kerosene today, or just 1 Coke bottle worth of kerosene today? So if we can reach our customer and have them demand the product, I mean, this is all kind of business school stuff. You need to build demand. How do you do that? I realized, okay, well, we need to have women in that process. We have women selling to women, one-on-one, conveying knowledge as well as creating demand and then satisfying that demand. And then I looked around, I was like, oh, this kind of sounds like Avon. This is what it reminds me of. Why don't we do that? Then I thought, well, would that work? And the first person I went to go see to, sort of ask the questions and see if this is going to work is a woman, Sarah Kasuli, who's head of the Mothers Union in Uganda. The Mothers Union is it's like the church ladies of Africa. They are women. They have committees in every single tiny little village throughout Africa, and those women run the continent. I mean, these are powerful women at the very grassroots level. And so I went to her and asked her, I've got this thought. What do you think? And she said, well, what are you doing tomorrow? Let's go try it out. Let's go out. I'll introduce you to a few women. We'll we'll see if they want to take a look at these products, if they would sell them. And she introduced me. We climbed up a mountain. She introduced me to the women, and they took our bags of product that we had and promised that they would pay us for them next week. And by the time we got in the car and got back to Kampala, Lydia, who turned out to be our first entrepreneur, had texted us on the phone, okay, I've sold it, now what? So I was like, okay, we're on to something here. And so the point of that whole story was I asked questions, and I had an idea, but what do I know? So I went and asked questions of people who would know, and then we tried it out. And a lot of the stuff that we tried out to begin with turned out to be a really bad idea, and then we changed it and did something a little different. It turned out to be a worse idea, and so we changed that, and we kind of finally find our way to the right thing. So I think what you do is you try it. You try not to make any fatal mistakes along the way, is I guess all I would say.
Okay, well, great. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much to all of yourselves for coming on.
I'm sorry we need to rush off and get them to the TV studio, the Channel 8. I know that you'd like to ask some questions, and sorry we don't have time for that. But I want to thank you all for coming. Mark Strike from the University of Houston Small Business Center has
So we have some
a
lovely parting gifts for you.
right.
That one would be for you. I'm sure that one's for you. Now, this one was chosen especially for you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So thank you very much, and let's thank our speakers again. It was just an absolutely wonderful talk.